She was the quiet one, the faithful one, the one who stayed when others would have run. For decades, Jessi Colter was painted as the angel beside the outlaw, a gospel heart tangled with a man set on burning every bridge. But now, at 82, she's rewriting the story. In a moment no one expected, Jessi whispered a sentence that sent shockwaves through her family. "He left something under the floorboards, and I never told a soul." The story she's held inside for over 40 years, of love, torment, and one night that changed everything, is finally coming out. It's not about fame. It's not about songs. It's about what really happened behind closed doors and what Waylon Jennings made her promise never to reveal. For the first time ever, Jessi Colter is ready to break that promise. And by the end of this video, the secret she's carried could change everything we thought we knew about country music's most legendary couple. Before Jessi Colter became the woman tethered to the myth of Waylon Jennings, she was simply Miriam Johnson, a preacher's daughter from Phoenix, with a voice like velvet dipped in lightning. She grew up on gospel and grit, playing piano in church, dreaming of songs that would reach beyond the altar. Before Nashville, before Waylon, before the chaos, she was her own person, and for a moment, the world saw her as that. She met Duane Eddy first. Yes, that Duane Eddy, the twangy guitar legend. They married young. She toured with him, learned the music business the hard way, and eventually broke free. By the early 1970s, she'd reclaimed her own name and sound, releasing I'm Jessi Colter with a spark the country world couldn't ignore. But the spotlight she was building for herself dimmed the moment Waylon Jennings walked into her life. Waylon was already a fireball of charisma and contradiction. He was magnetic, tormented, adored, and completely out of control. Jessi wasn't blind to it. She saw the pills, the whiskey, the short temper hiding behind that outlaw charm. But she also saw the man underneath, the dreamer, the poet, the broken boy, pretending to be invincible. And something in her wanted to fix him. Their relationship wasn't a whirlwind, it was a storm. They fought, loved, broke apart, came back. He'd disappear for days, sometimes weeks. She'd be left wondering if he was with another woman, or if this would be the time he didn't come back at all. And yet, she stayed. Not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because she believed, naively maybe, that her love was stronger than his demons. In 1975, Jessi had her breakout hit, I'm Not Lisa, a song about a woman living in the shadow of someone else. It was art imitating life, because even as the world sang her name, she felt like a ghost in her own story. Waylon, meanwhile, was becoming the face of outlaw country, and Jessi, despite her talent, was increasingly framed as his wife, not a star in her own right. Friends started noticing bruises, emotional ones, maybe more. Jessi denied it all, said he never laid a hand on her. But there was one incident in 1978, after a show in Houston, that's never been publicly discussed until now. She writes about it in a journal, in careful, slanted script. He looked through me like I wasn't real, like he didn't recognize me at all. What happened next, she says, is something she buried so deep, it almost disappeared. But it didn't. It's still there, under the floorboards, and it's where our story will return very soon. There were days Waylon wouldn't sleep, nights he wouldn't speak. The cocaine wasn't just a habit anymore, it was a demon riding his back, whispering through his bones, blurring the line between genius and madness. Jessi would find him pacing the floor at 4 in the morning, eyes bloodshot, ranting about things that made no sense. People in the walls, music no one else could hear, secret government vans following the tour bus. He was unraveling, and she was the only one still trying to sew him back together. The public saw a rebel king, a country god stomping across stages in leather and shadow. But Jessi saw something else. She saw a man haunted by childhood shame, by fame he never really asked for, by the death of friends, by the burden of pretending to be larger than life every single night. Waylon couldn't turn it off. And worse, He didn't want to. He fed the chaos because it was the only thing louder than the pain. One night in 1981, everything cracked. They were in a motel outside of Memphis. Cheap and quiet, away from the press. Jessi had been trying to get him to rest, to eat something, to just sit still long enough for the fog in his head to lift. But instead, he turned on her, not violently, but venomously. He said things she would never repeat, things that didn't sound like him at all. She wrote later that it was like watching the devil speak through the lips of someone you once loved. That night, she left the room, drove for hours, no destination, just the hum of the highway and the ache in her chest. And when she came back the next morning, Waylon was gone. No note, no bags, just a hole punched through the bathroom mirror and a tiny wooden box left behind on the nightstand. She didn't open it then. She didn't open it for 30 years. But when she finally did, it changed everything. The contents of that box and the message carved into its underside will be revealed later in this story. But even then, Jessi didn't leave. That was the part no one ever understood. Why didn't she walk away? Why didn't she save herself? The answer, she now admits, is heartbreaking. I thought if I left, he would die. And if he died, it would be my fault. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a saint. She was just a woman clinging to the hope that love, even bruised and bleeding, could still be enough to pull someone back from the edge. But what she didn't know was that the edge was closer than ever, and one day, it would cut through them both. The early 80s passed in a haze of neon signs, late-night shows, and whispered prayers Jessi never admitted she was saying. From the outside, they were country royalty. She still stood by his side at award shows, still smiled for the cameras, still hit the road when the bookings came. But inside the tour bus, inside the walls of their home, things were disintegrating. The man she had married, the man who once wrote her love notes in the margins of his lyric sheets, was slowly disappearing beneath the weight of addiction and paranoia. Jessi wasn't just carrying her own pain, she was carrying Waylon's too. Every time he collapsed backstage, she was the one holding his head. Every time he went missing, she was the one on the phone, tracking him down. She kept a notebook, hidden from everyone, where she logged the places he disappeared to, the aliases he used at check-ins, the excuses he fed to his management. Page after page, it was less a diary and more a map of a man who didn't want to be found. And then there were the hospital visits, the overdoses no one reported, the canceled gigs that were blamed on exhaustion. In one of the more chilling entries in her notebook, Jessi wrote, "He stopped recognizing me at night. He'd call me darlin', like I was just another fan he couldn't remember meeting." Her heart was breaking in slow motion, over and over, and there was no one she could tell. The myth of Waylon Jennings was too big, too sacred. To speak against it felt like blasphemy. But then came the baby grand. It was delivered to their home without a note, no card, just a faded inscription carved into the underside of the lid, "To the one who stayed." Jessi didn't know who sent it. Waylon never acknowledged it, but she started playing again, quietly, at night. Songs she hadn't sung in years, gospel hymns, lullabies, and slowly, something in her began to come back to life. That piano would become her refuge, the one place where she could still feel like Jessi, and not just the shadow beside a legend. But the deeper she went into the keys, the more memories came rushing back. One in particular, locked away since the early years of their marriage, began to claw its way forward. It had something to do with a night in Tucson, with a letter Waylon made her burn, with a secret he said would destroy everything if it ever got out. She thought she had forgotten it, but the piano remembered. And once that melody returned, the truth began humming just beneath her fingertips. A truth that would explain the box, the burned letter, and why. All these years later, Jessi Colter can't sleep without the lights on. Jessi had learned to live between two realities, one where she smiled and sang for the cameras, and another where the past haunted every quiet corner of her home. By the late 80s, Waylon had started his slow climb out of addiction, but the scars he left behind didn't heal just because the drugs were gone. In fact, Sobriety made some things worse. He was lucid now. He remembered more, and so did she. One night, he sat beside her at the piano. She was playing softly, humming a gospel tune, when he reached out and stopped her hands mid-chord. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he whispered, "Do you remember Tucson?" Jessi's blood ran cold. They hadn't spoken of that night in over 2 decades. She nodded slowly. Waylon just said, "I never should have made you burn it." What it was, Jessi didn't clarify. But that night, she wrote in her journal, "There's a reason I stopped singing that year. Something I saw. Something I did." That line has never been explained. Not even in her memoir. But those close to her say that for years, she avoided Arizona entirely. Friends who brought it up say she'd go quiet, distant, like her mind had left the room. Then, in 1992, while cleaning out a closet, Jessi found something she thought was long gone. A cassette tape labeled only with a single word, Tombstone. It was in Waylon's handwriting, and when she played it, her hands trembled. The voice on the tape was his, but it wasn't singing. It was confessing, rambling, crying, talking about a choice he made in 1974 that buried more than just a name. That tape was never meant to be heard, but Jessi kept it. She tucked it away in a safety deposit box, along with the wooden box from the motel and a photograph of Waylon standing outside a church with a man she'd never seen before. And under that photo, a name scribbled in faded ink, E.W. Don't forget what we did. Years later, Jessi tried to piece it all together. She hired a private investigator, quietly, off the books, to trace the name and the church. What she found led her to a desert graveyard, an unmarked plot, and a sealed court document from 1975 that had been buried under alias and bureaucracy. She never revealed what was in those documents, not to the press, not even to her closest friends. But in one interview, when asked about the greatest burden she ever carried, she said, "There's a reason I sing to God more than people now. Some things only heaven can forgive." And with that, the melody of their marriage took a darker, quieter tone. Because whatever happened in Tucson, it never really stayed there. It followed them. It bled into every note she played, every lyric she wrote, and every silence she held longer than it should have lasted. By the early 2000s, Jessi Colter had retreated into a quieter life. Publicly, she appeared serene, gracious in interviews, gentle on stage, always choosing her words, with the poise of someone who had carried too many secrets for too long. But behind the soft smiles and gospel tunes, her world had grown colder. Waylon was gone, and with him went the one man who knew the full weight of what they'd buried together. His death in 2002 hit her like a slow-moving train, not with a scream, but with a silence so deep she found herself unable to play the piano for nearly a year. Every room in their home felt hollow. Every song sounded like a ghost. People sent flowers, wrote tributes, and hailed her as the last woman standing from the Outlaw era. But none of them knew what she'd really lost. Because when Waylon died, he didn't just take memories with him. He took a pact, a buried truth. And Jessi, for the first time in decades, was alone with it. A year later, she received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photocopy of the photo she had kept hidden, the one of Waylon and the stranger outside the church. But this copy had something the original didn't. A second figure in the background, blurry, but unmistakably Jessi herself. Below it, a single typed line. The truth doesn't stay dead forever. She didn't tell her son. She didn't call the police. Instead, she quietly packed a bag and disappeared for 3 days. Where she went, no one knows. When she returned, she burned her journals, all of them. Decades of pages turned to ash in the backyard fire pit. Neighbors say she stood silently over the smoke for hours. After that, something in Jessi changed. She began speaking in parables, vague stories about God's mercy, forgiveness, and the price of silence. In interviews, when asked about Waylon's darker years, she'd shift focus. He made peace with God, she'd say. That's all that matters. But the eyes told a different story. Eyes that had seen too much, known too much, and were waiting for something or someone. Friends noticed she started locking her piano room. She kept her mail unopened for weeks. And once, during a songwriter's round in Nashville, she abruptly ended her set after someone in the crowd yelled, "Play something from Tombstone!" Her hands shook the entire way off stage. The past, it seemed, wasn't finished with her. And as whispers swirled about an unfinished song Waylon had written, one that allegedly referenced the church, the letter, and the deal, Jessi was left holding the last thread of a story that was never supposed to unravel. And what she did with that thread would soon shock everyone. The whispers grew louder with each passing year. It started in hushed conversations between old session musicians and road crew veterans. Rumors about a song Waylon had written but never released, a final track that had only been heard by a select few. They called it the fifth verse. Some said it was a confession, others believed it was a threat, but all agreed on one thing: Jessi Colter had the tape. The story went that Waylon recorded it late one night in 1989, alone in his home studio, just his voice and a guitar. The track never made it to any album, and the master reel was never logged by RCA. Jessi kept it hidden in a fireproof box, away from industry ears. Only one engineer claimed to have heard it, and he said it left him cold for weeks. The lyrics, he whispered, mentioned a preacher's lie, a grave with no name, and a woman who knew too much. That woman was Jessi. In 2010, an anonymous blogger posted a grainy audio clip, 20 seconds of what sounded like Waylon's voice humming a melody that didn't match any known recording. The post was deleted within hours, but not before fans caught wind of it. Reddit threads exploded, conspiracy videos circulated, and suddenly, a new generation of country fans wanted to know, what did Jessi Colter know about Waylon Jennings that she'd never shared? Jessi, meanwhile, remained silent. That changed in 2012 during a rare public Q&A in Texas. An audience member, young and bold, asked her directly, "Did Waylon ever record a song about Tucson?" The room went still. Jessi looked down, her hands folded in her lap, and then she said, almost too softly to hear, "He recorded many things he never wanted the world to hear." She said nothing more, but the damage was done. Interest reignited. Reporters began knocking again. Former bandmates were interviewed. Producers combed through archives. But the song, if it existed, was nowhere to be found. And that's when Jessi did something no one expected. She contacted a Nashville historian known for uncovering lost tapes from the Outlaw era. She handed him a sealed envelope and said, "Release this after I'm gone, not before." Inside was a letter, a story, and a USB drive. The contents have never been made public, but the historian confirmed its authenticity, and when asked what was on it, he simply replied, "It's not a love story, it's a warning." Whatever Waylon confessed in that lost song, and whatever Jessi has carried in silence for all these years, is now tucked away once more, waiting, because some truths don't die with the people who lived them. Some just wait for the right chord, the right voice, and the right time to finally be heard. By the time Jessi Colter reached her 80s, her public appearances had grown rare, her interviews even rarer. But when she did emerge, it was never without purpose. In 2022, she attended a small private tribute show in Nashville, meant to honor the Outlaw legacy. Jessi hadn't been expected to perform, but halfway through the evening she asked quietly to take the stage. She sat alone at the piano, the spotlight warm on her weathered face, and for a moment, the room held its breath. She began with a familiar gospel tune, "Storms Never Last," the song she had once recorded with Waylon, but midway through she changed the lyrics. Subtle at first, a word here, a line there, and then a new verse no one had heard before. "You promised the preacher we'd never go back, but I still hear the shovel, the earth going black." The room froze. Songwriters in the crowd leaned forward. Producers exchanged glances. It was unmistakably a reference to the rumor, Waylon's unreleased song, "The Secret in Tucson," "The Grave with No Name." Jessi finished the song in silence, didn't say a word, and left through the back door before anyone could ask her what it meant. That performance never aired. Phones had been prohibited, but word spread fast. And in the days that followed, industry insiders began re-examining old logs, demo tapes, even Waylon's discarded lyrics. One sheet surfaced with a line scribbled in the margins. She held the key, but never the map. The lie was buried where prayers overlap. It reignited the mystery. Meanwhile, Jessi made a curious move. She reached out to an old friend of Waylon's, a man known in the community for dealing in vintage recording gear and outlaw memorabilia. To him, she entrusted a battered leather case. She didn't say what was inside, just looked him in the eye and said, "Make sure it finds the right ears when I'm gone." When pressed in a later interview about whether there were things left unsaid between her and Waylon, Jessi smiled sadly and said, "Not unsaid, just unheard." By now, the whispers had taken on a life of their own. What exactly had happened in Tucson? Who was the man in the photograph? Why was there an unmarked grave and a church with sealed records? And what had Waylon begged Jessi to burn? And what had she refused to? As her health became more fragile, fans began to realize that Jessi wasn't just the last link to Waylon. She was the last person alive who knew the full story. And the deeper you looked, the more it felt like the songs, the silences, and the buried verses were all pieces of a confession too heavy for one voice to carry. And still, she sang, because that was the only way she knew how to tell the truth. The final truth didn't come in a dramatic reveal, a press conference, or a best-selling memoir. It came in the form of a quietly released acoustic album. No promotion, no label, just uploaded to a little-known streaming site under Jessi Colter's real name, Miriam Johnson. The album was titled Floorboards. No liner notes, no lyrics, just 10 songs. And one of them, track 7, was simply called Tucson. Fans who found it listened in stunned silence. The song was raw. Jessi's voice, older and lined with grief, sang not of love or heartbreak, but of secrecy and burden. The lyrics painted a picture of a desert church, a midnight confession, and a man digging into dry earth while a woman prayed under flickering lights. One line in particular stopped listeners cold. He said the bottle was empty, but the deed was done. So we buried the truth before the morning sun. It was poetic, yes, but it wasn't abstract. It was specific, and it sent a message to everyone who had been following the mystery. Jessi had finally spoken. Within days, the song disappeared from the site, taken down, scrubbed from servers. Only a handful of people managed to download it before it vanished. But the damage, or perhaps the healing, was done. The myth was broken open. In the months that followed, a church outside of Tucson quietly underwent a renovation. According to local records, a portion of its basement was excavated due to foundation instability. No further details were released, but some locals claimed government vehicles were seen near the site. Others insisted it was just a construction crew. But once again, Jessi said nothing. Then came her final interview. Sitting on the porch of her home, sunlight cutting through tall oaks, Jessi was asked if she had any regrets. She paused for a long time before answering. "I wish we had been more honest," she said, "with each other, with ourselves. But Waylon, he was a haunted man, and some ghosts you can't bury with songs." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Jessi Colter had lived through love and chaos, through silence and storms. She had stood beside one of the most powerful figures in country music and quietly protected a truth too dangerous to share in its time. And now, in her final years, she had chosen to let the pieces fall where they may. Because not all mysteries are meant to stay buried. Some are sung softly by the last voice left who remembers.